com.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy, and one of the socialist Spice Girls put another marker down, Rashida Tlaib.
You know the Spice Girls are outperforming again, don't you? The reunion tour?
Not just the socialist Spice Girls, the actual Spice Girls.
Spice Girls? Yeah, I got you a ticket.
Is Posh Spice still there?
I'm sorry.
No Posh Spice? David Beckham won't let her perform?
No.
How dare he?
Yeah.
Huh.
Thought she had her own voice and a choice. But
Scary
apparently
Spice?
not. She's there, yeah. They're still looking good.
Keeping it tight?
Yeah.
Keeping
it real.
I'll check it out. Thanks for that.
There's tickets in your mailbox.
I don't want to see any more. Well, I do want to see actually more of the socialist Spice Girls too, because I think they're incredibly instructive. Rashida Tlaib is on the House Oversight Committee.
Darn right she is. Yeah.
There was a questioning of the Assistant Director of Counterterrorism for the FBI, talking about terrorist threats, domestic and international. So, of course, after we've uncovered Islamic terrorist training sites in both Alabama and New Mexico, Rashida Tlaib's focus is on white supremacy. Much like Jan Schakowsky's here, Calamity Jan Schakowsky's focus is on white supremacy right after synagogues are shot up in Pittsburgh and San Diego. It's remarkable. Here's Rashida Tlaib.
And white supremacist extremism cases would all fall under so-called domestic terrorism, correct?
Yes.
My understanding is that the remaining 80% of FBI's pending counterterrorism cases would be characterized as the international, what you called them I hate these labels, by the way, it drives me, as a Muslim, I just hate them because it automatically makes me feel like people are targeting those of different faiths and colors and so forth. But call HVE cases.
So I think you're...
The 80% left from that budget, the resources are going to, no?
No. So
no, you're wrong.
We have approximately 4,500 to 5,000 terrorism cases.
Okay.
Of that, approximately 850 domestic terrorism cases. So if you take the rest, those are international terrorism cases.
So HVEs, which is homegrown violent extremist cases. And hey, I don't like that term, because homegrown violent extremists, which has no racial or religious designation, she feels it's targeting black and brown people, Muslims, or what have you. But it's 20% of the overall counterterrorism caseload you just heard from the Assistant Director of Counterterrorism, the homegrown violent extremists. As a Muslim, this is the other thing I love about identity politics. Everything is prefaced with your identity. As a Muslim, this.
I know. We know you're Muslim. We know.
As a
woman. No, that's my favorite.
As a mother,
well,
this is coming.
As a coach.
Tlaib received a threatening letter, and she wanted to emote all over the Assistant Director of Counterterrorism.
I've been in office for about 6 months. And when you get something like this, attention Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and ragheads Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, I was totally excited and pleased when I heard about 49 Muslims were killed in many... Many more were wounded in New Zealand. This is a great start. Let's hope and pray that it continues here in the good old USA. The only good Muslim is a dead one. How is that enough? Not enough to fall under domestic terrorism if they're targeting solely based on my faith and others and saying that a good Muslim is a dead one, obviously directed to me. By the way, they copied in this threat to my office. They copied the U.S. Department of Justice, the President, Department of Homeland Security, and so forth. And we get so many of them, and I keep asking, what happens? What happens to these individuals? Are they, I'm being sincere. I'm not trying to, I'm really sincere. I'm a mother, so I want to go home to my 2 boys.
Oh, boy. You're not the only one with 2 boys, but okay.
In Draper, Utah, if we're going to share anecdotes, A driver told authorities he intentionally struck an 11-year-old girl on a scooter because she was white, according to a police report released over the weekend.
White too. Yeah,
Right, yeah.
crazy.
The police described the driver as engaging in erratic behavior. The behavior was described as uncooperative, aggressive, and non-sympathetic toward the child victim. Does this mean that 11-year-old girls, there's some sort of national emergency with respect to 11-year-old white girls being targeted for being white girls? No, not necessarily. But we're supposed to listen breathlessly, be mesmerized by Rashida Tlaib's identity politics masquerading as real concern, real public policy concern for a victimized community of some sort. And then you hear Rashida Tlaib go on to get to what she's actually referencing after the pro forma statement about how concerned she is, or how we need to tread lightly when it comes to free speech. She got a nasty letter from some ignoramus. We get nasty emails from ignoramuses all the time.
Every day.
You don't hear us crying and bitching about it. That's life.
When it comes to threats of life towards other people based on, somebody of Jewish faith, Muslim, being black in America, this anti-blackness movement that we have, when do we take those so seriously as a movement that is obviously pushing violence?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the anti-blackness movement that's taking over America. You'll have to elaborate, Representative Tlaib. I mean, it's remarkable to listen to these individuals, and they're trying to have, or they should be having, a serious conversation with the Assistant Director of Counterterrorism about terrorist threats to this free society, both domestic and foreign. What is the status of ISIS? What is the ability of these various terrorist groups to export terrorism abroad to the United States? What about those training camps that were identified? You want to talk about cells of white supremacists, relitigate Charlottesville? Fine. At least try to stay on point. These sort of generic, emotional, mindless statements to advance this faux oppression narrative. This solidarity and marginality political market positioning. It's disgraceful. And it's sad that, outside of talk radio, there's Tlaib and even to some extent Omar and AOC aren't really held to account for their nonsense. More on this and also talk about his Gold Star Insight of the Week. We're pleased to be joined by our friend John Hinderaker, president of the Center for the American Experiment, and, of course, routine contributor at powerlineblog.com. John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning, guys.
I know we had you on to talk about impeachment, so I'm not going to press you to respond to Tlaib and her comrades in arms, but if you want to address it, you're welcome to.
Well, one quick observation is that if you look at the way these people categorize violent events, mass shootings, terrorist events, or whatever, if it's obviously an Islamic extremist event like 9/11 or something, it goes in that category. Everything else they categorize as white supremacists, right? I mean, to listen to these people, you would think there's some vast movement of white supremacy, or as she said in that clip, the anti-blackness movement. I mean, tell me more. I have yet to encounter this.
Well, but 9/11 too, referenced by Omar as an event where some people did some things.
Yeah, and the full context of that quote is that, she's setting out the position that the only important thing about the September 11 attacks was the anti-Islamic overreaction to them. The attacks were us and people did something. And then there was this huge threat to our civil rights. And she starts talking about how, that's the important thing.
Mm-hmm. All right. I've been Bidening you all week, taking your work as my own. So I wanted to give you a chance to actually represent your own work. You had a great insight, a single word that has a deep meaning that you picked up from Robert Mueller's press conference last week, and prompting a lot of questions that other people now are asking, including John Solomon over at The Hill we talked to yesterday. But included is the word. Why was that word so important?
Yeah, well, I think I see Robert Mueller as like the Inspector Clouseau of our time, right? He's walking along with his magnifying glass and his nose down close to the ground, and he's supposed to be looking for evidence that's relevant to Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, and he's investigating the wrong campaign. He says, well, my charge was to look into Russian interference, including any possible collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. And he just willfully blinded his eyes, apparently, to the fact that there was collusion between a presidential campaign and the Russians. But it wasn't the Trump campaign, it was the Clinton campaign. We all know that the Steele dossier, which was the sole basis, now admitted to be completely groundless by Robert Mueller, but the sole basis for this whole Trump collusion hysteria that we've suffered through for the last 2 years, we all know now that that was paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign. They laundered the money through their law firm, Perkins Coie, so they could falsely report it in their campaign reporting as legal expenses. How about that? Is anybody investigating that crime? I don't think so.
And how much money did they spend?
I've forgotten now. That number is in the public domain. I just can't remember.
$35 million or so. And
oh my gosh.
And the point that you make too. The point that you bring up. I think people have completely forgotten, purposely gaslighted by the D.C. press corps, of course, that the Mueller investigation was about Russian interference in 2016, the 2016 election generally. I think people think about this case, and because this has been the singular focus, say, well, it was all about what did the Trump campaign do in 2016, and that wasn't the special counsel's charge.
It's so ironic because the whole thing spins out from that Steele dossier. So it's not like he wasn't investigating the Steele dossier. He did, and he concluded that it was just completely groundless, made-up nonsense. But he didn't go on to ask the next question, say, well, where did it come from? Who paid for it? But we know who paid for it. It was the Hillary Clinton campaign. And one of two things happened. Either Christopher Steele just made up those memos that he claims to have gotten from Russians, or, in the alternative, there actually was collusion between Russians who apparently were close to the Putin administration, if not members of the Putin administration, based on the things that they ostensibly said, and the Hillary Clinton campaign. But Mueller just willfully averted his eyes from that issue.
And there's some suggestion that Steele is laying low and resistant to testify. But he's afraid that he's going to be made the fall guy as Barr and his designee, assistant or U.S. Attorney Durham, start to zero in on the rest of what happened in 2016.
Yeah, I know. I saw a headline just a day or two ago, and I haven't followed up to see if there's much meat to the story, but there was a headline that said that Christopher Steele has indicated he may be willing to talk to somebody in connection with that investigation. He has not set foot in the United States, because if he does, he's going to get subpoenaed. Mm-hmm. And so he's kind of holed up in the UK.
Wow. So where do you think it goes from here?
Well, where it goes from here is entirely a political question, I'm afraid. I'm hopeful that Barr and Durham and their investigation, also the DOJ Inspector General's report, Horowitz, that's due out apparently any day. That's going to look into misdeeds by the Department of Justice, including the FBI. It could be very important. So, I'm hoping that those investigations will fill in some of the blanks and tell us more about this effort that was obviously made by the FBI, the DOJ, and the CIA to assure that Hillary Clinton would win the election, and then after Trump was elected, to try to disrupt his administration, discredit his administration, undermine his administration. We know it happened. There's a lot that's already in the public domain. So those investigations may help to, fill in some of the blanks and provide additional information. But where it really goes is political. And, Representative Clyburn said a day or two ago that the Democrats in the House are going to impeach Trump. It's just a question of when. And I think that's probably right. And I think that the purported ground that they will use is obstruction of justice, which in my opinion is laughable. The idea that firing a lousy FBI director is somehow as obstruction of justice, that's ridiculous. That he is answerable to the president. He reports to the president. If the president thinks he's doing a poor job, he has a duty to fire him. And it's absurd to claim that that's obstruction of justice. And they've got other theories coming out of the Mueller report. Maybe this or that is obstruction of justice in connection with the Mueller investigation. But of course, the Mueller investigation was not obstructed. Trump and the administration cooperated fully with it, as Mueller has admitted. So the whole thing is ridiculous. But I do think that in order to distract the voters and to keep up the drumbeat of hatred against the president, I think what we're going to see at some point here is that the Democrats in the House are going to vote a bill of impeachment.
He is John Hinderaker, president of the Center of the American Experiment, and get his writings at powerlineblog.com. John, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. Great to be with you. Bye-bye.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.